Gondwana split apart and Australia became an island. And then just under the normal development of the flora, they become separate species. And then just over time, they become its own endemic flora. West Australian flora is generally more diverse than the Eastern Australian flora, and that's because our land is a lot older. So I don't know how blue the 10% is, but it's really based around pollinators and what they can see. They see in the UV spectrum, a lot of them, which is, we don't see that. If you look at flowers under UV light, they're quite different. And so blue is likely to be a colour that's less visited by a range of pollinators. West Australian plants have what we call recalcitrant seed, so they don't germinate readily in glasshouse conditions. The West Australian flora is very fire adapted, so a lot of plants won't germinate until there's been a fire, and then they'll germinate readily.
Welcome to a new episode of We Science. When we go to parks and botanical gardens, behind every blossom and behind every plant, there is a group of scientists that are working day and night to maintain those plants and to conserve those. Today, we have a special guest, Digby Growns, who is a senior plant breeder here at the Kings Park. Welcome, Digby, for accepting my invitation to be part of this podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Kings Park is one of the largest inner cities parks in the world. Could you please give us a little bit of story of where we are located today?
Well, Kings Park and Botanic Gardens is right in the centre of Perth in Western Australia. It's a 400 hectare area of land. About 2/3 of that is natural bushland, and the rest of it is parkland, and then about 17 hectares is the actual West Australian Botanic Garden. So it's a real composite of different parks and natural areas, and it's a bit different to other botanic gardens in that our botanic garden is within a bigger parkland, whereas a lot of botanic gardens are entities just in their own right.
But then, how this large park that is in the middle of the city, how does it survive across the time and preventing all these people who wanted to build buildings here? Yeah,
well, it is a great story, and there's a book out called Joy Forever. So if anybody wants the real detail, they can get that book. But basically it was set aside about 150 years ago, gazetted as a park by the early European founders, and then it's been developed over time, and they were really seeking to make it like an English parkland with lawns and trees and things like that. But there was sort of several budget crunches over the years, and it meant that a lot of the bushland area that was here naturally didn't get developed like they wanted to. And then in the 1950s, there was a very strong movement by the Wildflower Society to preserve that bushland and save it from developers. Sometime not long after that, when the Commonwealth Games were on, they wanted to build a swimming pool here. There's been other instances of wanting to put housing in here, and it's all been resisted because of it. Kings Park's just an amazing place. If you haven't been here, come and have a look if you're from interstate or overseas. It's just an incredible place, and it's been a meeting place since pre-European settlement as well. So even the Indigenous people used to use it as a place to come and socialise, and it's had that role right from thousands of years ago through to the present.
Fantastic, that's fantastic. Sorry. What motivated you to become a scientist, particularly in plants?
Well, again, an interesting story. When I was in high school, I studied physics and chemistry and maths, and so I always had that, inclination. I enrolled in geology, interestingly enough, in Kalgoorlie after I left school, but that only lasted a year. And over time I had odd jobs, and then I went travelling, as you do in Western Australia. I left for a couple of years and led a bit of a hippie life. Ended up in South America, and I was actually on the train going to Machu Picchu, and I was talking to a local there on the train, and I'd seen some eucalypts out the window, and I just, as a conversation started, I'd mentioned to him that those eucalyptus are from Australia, and he flatly refused to believe me. He said, no, they're here, they're local. They grow here, they're natural here. And, the reality is that those eucalyptus have been in Peru for over 100 years, and they used them. It was very important to their local economy, for building, for firewood. And it just got me thinking genetically, how does a plant come from Australia and then do so well in a completely different environment? So that it sort of triggered my interest in the science of plants and the genetic side of things. My parents were always very interested in native plants, and so I guess it's that combination of that interest in the genetics and the interest in Australian plants that I then, when I came back to Australia, I went and studied horticultural science at Murdoch University and have continued from there.
And then what went on?
Well, then I got a job at UWA after I graduated, the University of Western Australia, and that was on selecting forms of gelatin wax from bush where they occur naturally in Western Australia to use in the cut flower trade. At the time, Western Australia had a burgeoning trade in growing and selling gelatin wax in the export market, but they needed new varieties. Ornamental plants are a fashion industry, and so after time they just get tired of the same variety, even if it's a good one. So I did that for a couple of years. Then I got a job at the Department of Agriculture in the floriculture area. I went up to Geraldton for 4 years and helped develop the industry. Came back to Perth and I was with the department for about 12 years. And then I was lucky enough to get a job as a Director of Horticulture and Conservation here at Kings Park, which is, you know, I'd always wanted to come and work at Kings Park, and it was just such an amazing opportunity. And I've been here for nearly 20 years now.
Yeah, and your career is over 30 years, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a long and rewarding career. Absolutely, I'm very fortunate.
So you were talking. Thank you so much for telling us your journey. You were talking about the eucalyptus when you went to Machu Picchu and when you went to Peru, and then you were talking to this local, and then he was refusing that the eucalyptus was from Australia. And then, yeah, I'm originally from Colombia, so you see a lot of eucalyptus and pines growing in the high altitude for commercial purposes. Yeah. Because I guess the ones that are at the sea level, they are very fertile. So then they wanted to push all those eucalyptus and the pines to up in the mountains. And then I was checking, and then there are over 700 species of eucalyptus, and the majority are from Australia. Yeah,
well, pretty much most of the eucalyptus occur in Australia. There's 1 or 2 species, I think, in New Guinea and one in the Philippines, I think. But yeah, it's pretty much an endemic genus to Australia.
And then when I was growing up in Colombia, you see the eucalyptus everywhere there. My dad, who is a agronomical engineer, he has a farm, a coffee growing farm, and then he always was against the eucalyptus and the pines because he said that they suck the water and they make the soil infertile and acidic. And then it's interesting how, when we are going to bring those species from the native environment, habitat, and then be able to bring them to a foreign ecosystem, how much it is going to have an impact on the environmental part and the biodiversity as well, affecting not only the flora but also the fauna, the animals as well there, right? It's very interesting how the eucalyptus, although it's very widely used for paper, for oil, for firewood, it's very interesting how, we always talk about Australians always receiving these foreign species.
Yeah, we do have a lot of weeds, but they do have some negative impact, absolutely. And you look at California now with their wildfires. A lot of the eucalyptus seem to be driving the fires in California. But economically, a lot of countries have benefited from using eucalyptus. So it's that balance really that that needs to be assessed. And when they get outside of where they've been planted and used for economic purposes, that's when they can become an issue.
Yeah. And then you were talking about the oils, essential oils from eucalyptus. And when I was in Colombia, I remember that the smell of the eucalyptus was way stronger than here. Is there any particular reason?
It might be the species. And as you say, there's 700 species. And so different eucalypts have stronger oil than other eucalyptus and different fragrances as well. So, down Kings Park, the Fraser Avenue, we've got the lemon scented gum, and that's got a lemon fragrance, which is fantastic. But Eucalyptus polybractea from Victoria, that's one that's used a lot in the essential oil market, and that's got very high levels of oil. So it could be the species, but it also could be the climate. Essential oils are made by plants as a protection mechanism, and we just happen to use it for our purposes. So if it's hotter or colder or there's insect attack, those essential oils protect the plant against those stresses. And so it may be that particular species in your particular area was suffering some sort of heat or cold or other environmental stress, and so produced a bit more oil that you could then smell.
Yeah. So in terms of Australian flora, so I know I was reading that it's very unique. Like 90% of the species that are growing in Australia, they are only found in Australia.
Yeah.
Could you please tell us a little bit of like a history of the Australian flora
what
and
I know,
why it became like that?
I'm not a complete expert, but we were part of Gondwana, which is South America, Africa and Australia, and some of the flora, like if you look at the South African proteaceous species, they're similar to our banksias, and so they were, way back in the past they were,
very interesting,
they're quite related. So then when Gondwana split apart and Australia became an island, and then just under the normal development of the flora they become separate species, and then just over time they become its own endemic flora. West Australian flora is generally more diverse than the Eastern Australian flora, and that's because our land is a lot older. So in Eastern Australia had the Blue Mountains, and there's a lot more recent geological activity in the east, and so that leads to plant extinctions, etc. Whereas West Australian landform has been very stable over a long period of time, and so that allows evolutionary effects just to stay in place for a long, long time. And so you get genera like Verticordia with over 100 different taxa in it. So they've really diversified just under that long period of little geological change.
And that diversification it goes in parallel with the animals as well.
Yeah, well that's the same thing. Yeah, exactly. So we've got quite unique animals here. A lot of marsupials, which they have some elsewhere, but not to the extent that we have.
Yeah, fantastic.
And that's that pollinator interaction as well. Like we've got a lot more honey-eating birds over here that pollinate flowers. A lot of, in Europe, I don't think they have any. In the US, they've got the hummingbird, but not much else. So that unique flora and the unique animals, that interaction is quite significant as well in terms of the development and what happens evolutionary.
Great, that's very interesting, right? Because people in Australia, they don't know much about what we really make us unique.
Well, if you haven't travelled, I guess it's hard to get that perspective. But once you see other areas of the world and you understand really how unique Australia is.
And also, for example, the koala that eats the eucalyptus leaves. Then, of course, there is nothing else. He has to eat the eucalyptus.
Yeah, exactly. Very adapted to a particular
it's
thing.
like it goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
So your expertise, you have been working across different fields, but mainly you are working on plant breeding. Could you please explain to us what is plant breeding from what normally happens in the gardens, etc.?
Well, plant breeding is basically taking one particular parent plant and putting pollen from another plant onto that stigma and getting a hybrid seed. And hybrids are basically developed from just two different parents. I mean, I'm a hybrid from my two parents. I've got attributes that come from both parents. It generally means taking different species and crossing them, so you get interspecific hybrids. You can also get rarely crosses between two genera and get into generic crosses. So mostly it's doing that cross and getting hybrid seeds and really looking to get a plant that has better attributes than the both parents. So you're trying to improve from where you came from in terms of a plant or even an animal for whatever end use that you want. So with Kings Park, the environment is a strong focus in the breeding of what we do, but the ornamental attributes are also important too.
So what strategies do you normally use or implemented? Because I know that there are, for example, natural selection, when you naturally select the species that you really want because of the color or because of resistance to drought or any particular characteristic that you are after. But I guess it goes into, for example, the grafting as well as the manipulation genetically of those plants.
Yeah. We do use natural selection. So from time to time we'll go into the natural areas and select particular plants, either for use as parents because of where they come from. They might be a plant that comes from quite an arid area and we're looking to bring that arid zone tolerance into plants, or it might have bigger flowers or a different colour flower that we're seeking. Or it might, in its own right, it might actually be a plant that we can turn into a cultivar, commercially released. So we do that. That's certainly a part of our program. Most of it's based on just interspecific crossing. So just taking, in the case of kangaroo paws, taking pollen from one plant and putting it onto another, and then raising that seed, and then seeing what attributes each seedling has that may improve on what we have. It could be disease tolerance, which is a big focus, plant height, flowering time, those sort of things. In the lab, we use techniques to increase the ploidy of plants. So most organisms are what we call diploids. So they have two sets of chromosomes. Most animals have two sets. In the plant world, they can have different levels of what we call ploidy. So there can be tetraploids, there can be triploids. The tetraploids have 4 sets of chromosomes, triploids have 3 sets. It's aneuploidy, where, say, the normal base number will be n equals 11, and then a plant might have 10 or 9, and they've dropped chromosomes off. So it's quite a complex area. We use the tetraploids to restore fertility. So in a lot of interspecific crosses where, when you do the hybrids, those hybrids will be sterile. And now if you want to get a wide range of characteristics in your hybrids, you need to go to the second generation, where you get recombination occurring that gives you all the attributes the parents have and more. But if the first generation is sterile, you can't do that. So by doubling up the number of chromosomes, you can restore fertility in those hybrids, and then that will give you the opportunity to get to that second and third and later generations.
Fantastic. So, and these particular ones, the crossings, are something that are not like from this age. It goes back into history, right? Where ancient civilizations were also trying to sort of do cross-pollination.
Well, plant breeding has been going on for 10,000 years, really. It started with crop species, and that was just through selection of particular ones that did well. And over time, that's evolved into actually manipulating the hybrids that you get to the present day. I mean, roses that you see in your garden, they've been bred for over 400 years. And a lot of people don't really know that the roses that you get in the wild look nothing like the roses that you get in the garden. So, and that's been done for ornamental purposes. And so the main driver was for food related, and a lot of that's still going on today to, get a bigger, longer lasting apple, or a pumpkin that produces sweeter flesh, or, lots of different ways in animals as well to increase production. So the ornamental plant breeding really has a different focus than that food production. A lot of the ideas are still the same to improve on what's out there, but yeah, it has been going on for a long time.
Yeah, of course, and the selection of the characteristics is like a very anthropocentric, like a very human-centric approach, right? It's like what looks beautiful, what gives us the best fruit, etc. So that's the main driver. So what will be the challenges in terms of, and also the impact negatively and positively that can have this plant breeding?
Well, the challenges, particularly for using Australian flora, is that it's not well researched in terms of pollination biology. So plants have very complex systems in what can happen with pollination and with then seed set, etc., etc. And so, a plant like a rose is very well researched, very well understood. But a plant like a kangaroo paw, there's not a lot of research that's gone on with pollination biology. So a lot of it is just trial and error. We try a lot of things to see what works and what doesn't. We still don't understand it completely, but we're more successful now than we have been in the past. And then there's seed. West Australian plants have what we call recalcitrant seed, so they don't germinate readily in glasshouse conditions. They'll often, as part of their life cycle, the West Australian flora is very fire adapted, so a lot of plants won't germinate until there's been a fire, and then they'll germinate readily. And Xanthus kangaroo paws is one example of that. So they respond to smoke as well as to heat in terms of their germination. So if you're trying to then just do it without those, it can become quite difficult. The Camelorsium, the wax flower, they have a very woody fruit that sits in the soil for years before they germinate. And so if we want to then germinate those plants, we have to do it in the laboratory. So cut open the woody fruit, rescue the embryo and germinate it in sterile conditions. So Those are challenges in actually doing it. Positive outcomes, and what we're really seeking is positive environmental outcomes. So we want plants that people can put in their gardens that help the urban fauna survive. So it gives a food source and it gives habitat for our local urban fauna. But we also want plants that use less fertiliser and less water, because particularly in Perth and we're struggling in terms of summers are getting hotter and rainfall is getting less. So if we produce plants that don't need as much water, that's a good thing. Disease means people don't need to use chemicals on their plants to control diseases. So again, that's a good thing. But the plants also have to be really ornamental, because the supply chain for people getting these plants is, they go to retail outlets and buy the plants. So they'd rather buy a plant that looks great than one that doesn't look great if it's got the same, environmental impact. So it's really about people loving the plant and putting it in their garden, and then the environmental impacts are an added benefit to it also looking good. Some of the detrimental effects can be that plant becomes a weed. So, there are cases of, Patterson's curse is one that you see if you go driving through Western Australia, paddocks full of purple flowers. That was originally an ornamental garden plant that escaped and has now become a weed. So we have a weed assessment protocol for our plants to hopefully ensure that when they're commercially available, they don't become weeds in people's gardens.
Right. In terms of biodiversity, so how much does that affect in terms of the plant breed? Because you are selecting those ones characteristics. Of course, you are not replanting areas. This is for houses.
Yeah, so our plants, like our grevilleas for instance, they flower for 12 months of the year. So they can actually act as magnet plants for other plants around them. So because they flower for so long, the pollinators know that they're there and they visit them all the time. Okay. And so then when other plants close by flower, the insects or the birds or the bees, they're already there, and so you'll get enhanced pollination of other species that may not flower for as long a period. So by selecting the right plants for your gardens, particularly if you're adjacent to natural areas, it can actually enhance some of that activity, particularly in fractured landscapes, or where, again in Perth, our last 2 summers have been really brutal, particularly areas just outside the urban area where plants have died and the pollinators don't have food. Well, those pollinators disappear from those areas, whereas in the urban area they become a refuge for some of those animals. So it can have quite a positive effect. But we don't say to people, just plant your garden just full of hybrids, or you need diversity in your garden, and the more plants you have, the more biodiverse your garden will be, which is quite important.
Great. So you have been involved over the development of over 90 varieties of plants. So which ones have been the most rewarding ones? And we are near here, we're close to the kangaroo.
That's an interesting question, because they're all my babies, and you love to see your babies do well in the world. But I guess there's a couple. Our first commercial release in Grevillea was RSL Spirit of Anzac, and that was the commemorative plant for the 100th anniversary of the Anzacs. And so the RSL WA approached us and asked us if we had a plant that could be used for that. And so we picked one out of Grevillea, had red flowers, which symbolises the bloodshed of the Anzacs. It flowers at Anzac Day and was very hardy, and it's become we've sold over 200,000 plants since 2015, so it's been hugely successful. It's captured the imagination. It's planted. I've seen it here. It grows in Albany. They've got it down at the memorial in Albany, but I've seen it in Leonora, which is in the deserts as well. So it grows in central Queensland, in Victoria, so it's a very adaptable plant. So that one's certainly a special one. The blue kangaroo paw, that's probably made the most impact in terms of acknowledgement of the plant breeding program. I mean, it was a colour breakthrough. That's a rare thing to get in any breeding program. The fact that it's blue, blue is a rare colour in plants, and it was completely unexpected as well. So it wasn't something that we were trying to do. It was serendipitous. But since then, we've got other blues that we've made deliberately, and we're trying to develop a range of those, different shades of blue and ones that are more tolerant to growing in people's gardens. So I guess those are the two, but there's lots on the way. Waxflower our waxflower is grown globally now. So it's grown in South Africa, it's grown in Peru, it's grown in the US, it's grown in Israel, and we get a royalty back for every stem sold and every pot sold. So the Camelorsion waxflower part of the program has probably been the most commercially successful to date. Anaxanthus not far behind, and we'll get there. And the Camelorsion story in itself is a really interesting one because it's now a global plant, but it's endemic to Western Australia. It came from here, but it's been used as a garden plant for over 100 years and as a cut flower since the 1940s. In the Mexican immigrants in San Diego started that, using it as a cut flower, and that's now spread around the world. There's 100 million stems sold each year from various locations around the world. It really is a global plant in terms of both a garden and cut flower industry, and kangaroo paws are following in that footstep, and pretty soon they'll have the same status as.
Fantastic. You mentioned about the blue being a rare color. Only 10% of the flowers are blue. Why is that? Why is that blue is a rare color?
And it's interesting you say that because some people describe shades of purple as blue, and because it's actually a marketing thing. So I don't know how blue the 10% is. We've got a couple of astonishing plants here in Western Australia, the blue Leschenolti being one outstanding colour. But it's really based around pollinators and what they can see. They see in the UV spectrum, a lot of them, which is, we don't see that. If you look at flowers under UV light, they're quite different. And so blue is likely to be a colour that's less visited by a range of pollinators or has very specialist pollinators, or they see it differently to the human eye.
So there's a natural selection against the blue.
Yeah. That's possible. I don't know for sure, but it's certainly that it's a rare colour that would suggest that.
Yeah. So when breeding plants in conservation and research programs, what is the main focus? Is like being beautiful or environmental?
Yeah. Well, the environmental is the driver. So everything that we release has to have a positive environmental impact. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. Kings Park's an environmental agency. But if they're not beautiful, as I said before, people won't buy them. So I've got some really fantastic, really prickly grevilleas. Like, they'd be great refuge plants, they look good in flower, but if you put them in retail and somebody goes to pick it up and stabs themselves, they'll put it down. So prickly plants aren't well received in retail. So we've got to adapt what we put out, what we release, in terms of the whole supply chain. So it's got to do well here first. It's got to then be able to be produced in big numbers in wholesale nurseries, but then people have got to want to buy it, because there's no point having a plant that has got every environmental outcome that you want, but nobody buys it, because then it doesn't get planted and it doesn't deliver those environmental outcomes.
So you were talking before about the Australian natives plants being very unique. They are drought resistant, they are even fire resistant. What impact do you think it will have in the, of course, you are describing about the local and Australia, etc. But do you think that Australian flora can have a global impact, given those characteristics?
Yes, I do. Some of the feedback we've been getting from markets like in southern Europe and in the southern US is that a lot of our plants grow much better there with climate change, so the hotter, drier conditions that they're experiencing. But I'm a bit wary of that, given your description about what happens with eucalyptus once they escape their environment. So that's one of the reasons we try and breed sterile hybrids and plants that won't become weeds, because we don't want that negative impact. So it can have positive impacts because they use less water and they look fantastic. The pollinator thing, it's great, if there's insects around, particularly honeybees. Honeybees worldwide are in decline. Australia's lucky in that we've got quite a healthy honeybee population, but a lot of our plants, if you plant them around an orchard or where they're growing vegetables or something, and the bees get used to them being there, you get more pollination of your commercial crop as well. So they can have a benefit like that as well.
So some people might be confusing in terms of plant breeding again with GMOs. genetically modified organisms. Could you please describe what will be the difference and if there are any ethical barriers that you face?
Yeah, well, we don't use GMOs. So a GMO, genetically modified organism, is where a gene or a series of genes is artificially inserted into the genome of another organism. And it can be as an identifying marker, or as it can be, there's Roundup resistant crops now exist. And so they've inserted a gene into that plant to make that happen. Our breeding program, we don't insert genes. So we just do the cross-pollination, and then whatever the outcome of that occurs naturally during meiosis and the development of the seed is what we take. We do induce tetraploids, as I said, in the lab, but tetraploids are a natural occurrence in the plant world anyway. They estimate that over 70% of plants have undergone some form of ploidy increase or decrease over their evolution. And so we're just using systems that occur naturally in the plant world. Interspecific hybrids occur naturally in the bush as well, and I've found several over my time. So it's not something that is unnatural with plants that we're doing.
Yeah. So you were mentioning about the polyploidy, which is an extra set of chromosomes. So what benefits it gives the polyploidy? Is it makes it stronger, the plants?
Well, in nature, having that extra set of chromosomes, and there's a really good example in Eremophila glabra, which is a species that occurs here in Western Australia. And on the coast, the forms are diploid. As you go further inland, they become tetraploid.
Oh, really?
And then there's even hexaploid populations, which are 6 sets of chromosomes.
Indigenous populations, they have developed for several millennia a very intimate relationship with their habitat, with the ecosystems, with the plants and the animals. And then they have developed that knowledge about the different uses as a medicine, as a food, etc. Given my Hispanic background, I've seen that the knowledge about the plants for those purposes has been transferred from generation to generation as I said before, as a medicine and food, etc. So grandmas, moms, they can just, if they're feeling a little bit like a headache, they can just make an infusion of some herb or plant, etc., to be able to sort of to cure the headache. So how much of the knowledge about plants has been transferred, do you think, from the First Nations people to Western culture?
Yeah, I think there's it's probably limited within their communities. That transfer continues, So there's a lot of knowledge within each individual Indigenous community that keeps getting passed down. In terms of transferring between the Indigenous cultures and Europeans, there's a few examples like Eucaliptus using for if you've got a cold and things like that. That came from there, but it doesn't seem to be a general thing that we recognise as this coming from Indigenous knowledge. And it may be there, maybe early in the European settlement times that there was transfer of that knowledge, and that now it's part of our culture and that we don't understand that it's come from there. So there would be examples, but I don't think it's to the extent that what you're talking about in your Hispanic heritage.
Yeah. So as scientists, we have many failures and few eureka moments. Could you please share the most significant ones?
Well, really the eureka moment for me was the blue kangaroo paw. And I still remember now the first time I saw it walking around the corner of the nursery and seeing it flowering for the first time. And it was simply astonishing because, that blue is a colour breakthrough. It doesn't occur naturally in kangaroo paws. And it certainly wasn't something we were planning on doing. It happened serendipitously. We can now breed for it on purpose, and we're doing that for more hardy versions. But to have that occur was, it brought the attention and appreciation of the plant development program into a much broader sphere. So, that would be absolutely the number one. In terms of failures, it's really, our failures are positive. So, we fail every day. I don't have any big failures that I can think of, but we throw away or kill 99% of the hybrids that we produce because we only want the elite. So you could, I guess, think of each one of those as a failure, but it's a positive for the whole program, because the ones that come through are the ones that are tough, that look good, and that deliver all our outcomes. We've produced about 1.2, 1.3 million kangaroo paw seedlings since We started the program in 2007 and released 8 cultivars, so that shows you, you know, have we had a million failures? Technically yes, but the ones that are out there are great. So there's no real program failure in that respect, I think.
And that's part of the experimental, that's part of science, the experiments,
right.
And then you negative ones, and then you just discard them. So all of them contribute to the success.
Yeah, that's right. And that's how I see what we're doing.
So what role do you think botanic gardens, government, and general public play today and the future in regards to conservation and environmental?
Well, for us, it's about education. We want to showcase our flora, about how amazing it is, but also how much under threat it is from a whole range of different things like climate change, weed, land clearing, etc. like that. We have a really strong ex situ conservation program here in Kings Park and a really strong education program. So those are really important in letting people know that you know, conservation is important, our flora is important. So yeah, I think it's a good, strong role we play.
What makes you passionate about your job, about your work?
Yeah, well, you know, every day I come to work and there's a new flower or something new has happened, and so something I discover every single day, and that keeps me going, the anticipation. I grew up in West Australia, I'm born and bred here, and so I understand our flora is unique and different, and I get to work with it. So it's extraordinary, really. It's not really done anywhere else. Yeah, I'm very fortunate to be here.
How do you foresee your work to be, you know, passing into 20 years down the track, and your legacy?
Well, I think, you know, from an environmental point of view, I think people will start appreciating more and more the role that these hybrid plants can play in particularly urban environments. I think that, you know, roses have been bred for 400 years. Kangaroo paws can easily continue being hybridised for that long as well. There's always something new that will come through and something different. So I think the program will continue, and I think people will start to appreciate what our flora can deliver, not just ornamentally, but perhaps in terms of essential oils or medicines or things like that.
Yeah, great. What advice would you give to young scientists that are interested to work on botany?
Yeah, follow your passion, really, which is what I did. I mean, I sort of built this program here just following my heart and following, you know, opportunities I thought were there. There was a gap there that I was lucky enough to be able to fill a lot of it. But, you know, 30 years ago, I didn't think I'd be sitting here 30 years from now, having done what I've done. So there was no real plan to get from A to B to C. I just followed what I loved doing, and so to me that would be my advice, is to find something you love and try and be successful at it.
Great. Thank you, Digby, so much for accepting my invitation, for the fantastic chat, and thank you so much for all the work that you do for the present, but also for the future in regards to conserving and communicating all the breakthroughs in terms of plant breeding that you guys are developing. So thank you so much for all the work.
Well, thanks, Carlos. I appreciate you having me, and hopefully your listeners get something out of it.
Yeah, they will, certainly will. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you.